Happy Sabbath, everyone.
Happy Sabbath.
Oh. So, I've been waiting for this moment for 3 months now. It's been quite a really fast 3 months. And 3 months ago, I was standing up here and surrounded with two Pastor Johnnies. There was Johnny Wong, Johnny Khan, and I was introduced as the assistant pastor for this church. And in a wink of an eye, it's been one whole quarter. And when I was first asked to be a pastor, Eric is not here. Okay. I looked at him, I was like, that's a very good joke. And then I walked away. And 2-3 months later, they approached me again. They're like, we really think you need to consider pastoral ministry. And I looked at them, I told them, I think you really need to consider not asking me. But I think the Lord has His ways, and from that point on, I've been nagged at every night, cannot sleep. Someone over here knows that feeling, and finally I've gave in, and 1st of July I started 3 months. When I was standing here 3 months ago, the thought that was running through my head was, what am I going to do? How am I going to be of help to this church? And I remember that very first Sabbath, that was communion. And we had the tables out, and I was sitting with Trisha after the whole introduction. The first shocker was Elder Turambi, I remember. He led the communion with a script. I was like, wow, what's going on? How come he's, in Chinese we say, so zai, you know? He didn't look nervous at all, and inside my heart I was like, I come up for introduction, my heart is really beating and it's going to jump out of my chest. And later on, the sermon, following that was the lunch. Oh, the lunch. That was the first time I've ever eaten tempeh crackers, and it's changed my life forever. So, it was a day of many firsts. It was the first where, believe it or not, it's the first afternoon where we actually had visitation. Coming from Jurong, there's no visitation on Sabbath afternoon, so it was visitation. And we went, we had communion with two of the elderlies, and I was like, oh, this is meaningful. And then in the afternoon, in the evening, there was sundown worship. And the youth just came out. I don't know whether it was planned. They came out and they're like, okay, we'll just lead sundown worship. I was like, what's going on in this church? Everyone seems to be made for pulpit ministry. And here am I over here wondering, I'm going to melt on the pulpit. And 3 months. I remember going home that evening and I told Trisha, I finally figured out why I was sent to this church. I was not sent to this church to lead or to do whatever. I was sent to this church because God wanted to place me among giants. And it's been a privilege for me to learn from so many of you. I don't know how you guys do it. Tony comes up and then he shares Sabbath school like that. And I'm like, whoa! So before we start, I've selected this sermon title, Jesus Wept. Last week we talked about, Elder Eddie shared a little about the Garden of Gethsemane. This week, Jesus Wept, the story will be enveloped around the resurrection of Lazarus. And I want to look at it, but before that, I invite all of you to pray with me. Shall we pray? Our Heavenly Father, we are gathered here today because we know we need you. We want to be with you. So, Father, I ask that as I share this message, you will use me. May the words that come out from my mouth truly be an extension of your will. And I just pray that you fill me now, guide me. In your most precious name I pray. Amen. So we will be looking at the whole chapter 11. We are not going to read through the whole thing. This story is a very familiar story, I think, to most of you. And why this story? I think last evening when Elder Jimmy asked me, what's the title for your sermon? I said, Jesus Wept. He said, wow, we better bring tissue. So why so emo, Why such an emo topic? Well, I chose this topic because it's my first sermon, and if I'm from Maranatha, so my family is here. I thought they were not coming, but they're here. Don't know whether it's good or bad, but anyway, making me more nervous. I'm a second generation kid. I think if both of you, if you were here 20 years ago, you know I was not an easy kid. I was the one that was creating trouble all the time. And so, second generation, I was baptized in this church. I can't remember when. I think when I was 11 to 13, somewhere there. And with all that, the unfortunate part was Seventh-day Adventists still remain as my parents' religion for a long time, until I was 19. And why do I share this message? In this story, wrapped around it will be also an avenue for me to share my testimony. Why am I still in church today? Why am I still Adventist? And it's my first sermon, so I get to introduce a bit of myself. So, without further ado, let's move into the story. Now, we know the story of Lazarus starts with Jesus on one side of the River Jordan. Before the whole story starts, Jesus actually is escaping for his life. The Jews want to stone him because he has declared that he's Christ. And they're like, oh, blasphemy. How dare you declare you're Christ? And he's like, but I'm Christ. And for some of us, we look at Jesus and go, oh, turn the other cheek. Jesus is a really tough man. I mean, he looks at the people that wants to kill him and he says, he adds salt to the wound. He tells them, only the sheep. He says, even if I explain to you that I'm Christ, you will not believe me, because only the sheep can recognize the voice of their shepherd. So they wanted to kill him, and he still rebuked them. And so Jesus runs, he escapes across the River Jordan, and now, if you read at the end of chapter 10, you find that Jesus is at the spot where John the Baptist used to baptize people. Now, where was that spot for Jesus also? That was the first point where Jesus' ministry started. It was also the place where Jesus was baptized. So now we have Jesus. It's like he went one full circle and he's back to the exact same spot where he first started. And this is where the story of Lazarus starts, right in the beginning of the ministry. So Jesus receives word from Mary and Martha that Lazarus is very sick. Right? Over here. Jesus loved Martha and his sister and Lazarus. So his sister was Mary. And when he heard Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place that he was. Interesting that he stayed 2 extra days. We don't know what to do with that 2 extra days. Why Jesus would stay 2 extra days. Just remember it. We'll come back to that in a while. It's really odd. But anyway, later on, Jesus would declare, I am now going to Bethany. Now, Bethany is down on the side in the zone of Judea. And he says, fine, I'm going back to Bethany. So he has to cross the River Jordan again. And what do his disciples tell him? Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you. And are you going there again? what was the primary concern of his disciples? Their life and their safety. That was what they cared about. Rabbi, are you sure you want to go back? I mean, they didn't just want to stone you. You insulted them before we escaped. And then now you want to go back. And so, back to the 2 days. When Jesus hears that Lazarus is sick, first day, what does he do? He stays 2 more days, 3 days. Right? 3 days. What happens next? We find out in chapter 17 that when he reaches Bethany, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. 3 days, and when he reaches, it's been 1 full week. The Bible doesn't waste any words. There's a reason why John wrote, and he specifically wrote the 2 days. Now the 7th day makes 1 full week. Why is it significant for us? We are 7-day Adventists. Is the full week important? In this instance, as I studied, I was like, oh, this is mind-blowing. The Sabbath is extremely, extremely important to us. Why is the Sabbath so important? The Sabbath points to Jesus' purpose on earth. At the end of the creation week, Jesus rested. He did everything. He created everything for us. And when he was done creating man, he rested. But is there more to the Sabbath? How about salvation? When Jesus did everything and he died on the cross, what was the next thing that happened? The Sabbath started. He rested. And so when we remember the Sabbath, we are not just remembering that we are God's creation, we are remembering that we are redeemed by a creator. That is what's so important about the Sabbath. And more than that, back to the disciples, they were talking and they were concerned about their life. But what did Jesus say? In verse 11, if you can refer to the Bible, he says, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go awaken him." The disciples and Jesus, they were concerned about the same thing. They were both concerned about life. But one was concerned about their own life, but Jesus was concerned over whose life? Lazarus' life. The wrap of this whole message is a three-point message. This Sabbath, I want to look at 3 encounters that Jesus has. The first with the disciples, the second with Martha, and the third with Mary. And as we talk about these 3 conversations that go on in this story, let's see what it is. And these 3 points, to me, are the 3 points, the 3 necessary elements if you really want to have a real relationship with God. So the first point was what? Understanding the Sabbath and understanding what God's purpose is. The Sabbath, it is a gift from God and it's not a result of works. And so no one may boast. When we rest on the Sabbath, we remember that God did everything for us. And that's why we rest, to remember that. And back to the story, a bit nervous, so forgot the first point. But back to the part about the disciples and life. Jesus was more interested in their life than his life. Is it possible that as disciples of God, even as we do church, we are still more interested in our life and our safety and not their life and their salvation. The first point, if you want to have a real relationship with God, is understand what God's purpose is. When God's purpose is your purpose, you know you will start to have a real relationship with God. That's the first point. The second point, now Jesus, they move and he's outside Bethany, and Martha hears that he's outside, and what does she do? She leaves the home and she runs and she goes to meet Jesus outside the village. And she says this when she meets Jesus: Lord, if you have been here, my brother would not have died. That was a disappointment. She wanted Jesus to reach before Lazarus died. So take note of this sentence. It's an important sentence. And now for the next. Martha said to him, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And then Jesus says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, through though he may die, yet he shall live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? What is going on? In the first encounter with the disciples, Jesus was responding to the disciples. The disciples' primary purpose was their life and their safety. And Jesus responds to them by telling him, my primary purpose is their life and their safety. Over here, Martha quotes promises. She says, you have the power to resurrect. When you say something, when you repeat something that God says he will do, what is that? When God says something he will do, it's called a promise. I will come again. That is a promise. When Jesus says, I will heal you, that is a promise. Because whatever God says must come true. Even if it does not exist, it will start to exist. That's the God that we worship. And so, for Martha in this interaction, Martha is talking to him in terms of promises. Lord, if you are Lord, I know you can resurrect him. And she's repeating it to him. And Jesus repeats back to her the promise. I am the resurrection and the life. I'm getting somewhere with this. But before we move to the third point, I want to talk about promises. Did you all know that every Wednesday evening there is a prayer meeting here in this church? So far, the average count is 10. And every week we meet, we share God's promises, we share our petitions, and then we pray. Sounds really simple, but I want to challenge all of us. If you are free on a Wednesday night, come together and pray. We started doing something new this Wednesday. We started counting our answered prayers. In 1 week, just a few of us, we have 5. I wonder if all of us start coming together, how many answered prayers will we start to collect? You see, it's one thing to quote Bible promises and say, Lord, you are the resurrection. I know if you were here, you could resurrect Lazarus. But read the last part of Jesus' statement. Do you believe this? It is not good enough for us to just know the Bible promises. Jesus wants us to live a life where we believe his promises. There is a difference. You know someone believes promises when they live their life like it will come true. And that's what's so refreshing about about, people that have yet to come to know Jesus meeting us. They look at us and go, how are you still so happy even though life is so bad? And you go, because God said He'll carry me through. Do you really believe it? Point number 2, right? Prayer meeting. If you want to have an awesome relationship with God, first point, make sure God's purpose is the same as yours. Don't try to make God's purpose the same as yours. It's different. Make God's purpose the same as yours. Next, know, and not just know, but believe His promises. If you need healing, and the Bible says God will heal you, believe it. If you are broken-hearted, and He says, I'm with you and I'm your comfort, believe it. It takes a lot of faith sometimes to live a life in accordance to God's promises. Now the third point for me is the main point of why I'm still in church. It's a very personal story. My parents don't know about this. I think it's the first time they're hearing it. But after Jesus talks to Martha, what does He tell her? He tells her, go and get your sister. And so Martha runs all the way back home and she says, hey, Jesus is outside the village. Go and find Him. And so Mary stands up and she goes and finds Jesus. Where? Out of the village. Is not at home. None of these interactions happen at home. They go out, they find Jesus outside the village, and the first thing that Mary says is, Lord, if you have been here, my brother would not have died. Who else said this sentence? Martha. She just said it. So they both say the same sentence, and it's indicative that if you are 4 days late, and there are 2 women waiting for you, and they say the same thing, they have been complaining about you being late for 4 days. Okay? So you know it's true. You know you're in trouble when both say the same thing. It's something I learned. When my mom says something, my wife says something, my sister says something, and they're all the same. You know there was a board meeting behind. You need to take caution. And so now she's telling Jesus, Lord, if you have been here, my brother would not have died. It's the same thing. But what does she do after that? When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, He was deeply moved in His spirit and greatly troubled. And the ... is verse 34. Basically, it says He asked the people around Him, where is Lazarus? But after that, Jesus wept. These 2 words make up the shortest verse in the Bible. But as you uncover this, you will notice Martha never said anything. Mary never said anything else. All she did was she said, if you were here, my brother would not have died. And then next thing she did, she fell at His feet and she started weeping. And what did Jesus do? Jesus wept. So the first encounter with the disciples talk about life purpose. Jesus shares His life purpose. The second encounter with Martha, she quotes Bible promises. Jesus quotes Bible promises. The third, all Martha did was cry. And what did Jesus do? He wept. Why is this important? Do you ever notice in my story, Jesus was purposely late. And if you read, He says, for your own sake I was glad. He rebukes the disciples and He tells them plainly, for your own sake I was glad I'm not there, so that now you will see and believe that I have the power over there. So He was purposely late. Why would you cry? Why would Jesus cry? I mean, this would be the perfect encounter for Him, like the disciples on a boat. and they were screaming for help. And Jesus wakes up and says, "You of little faith." And he comes to storm down. He could have told Mary, "Oh, you of little faith. Lazarus, arise and walk." That was his plan all along, right? His plan all along was to resurrect Lazarus. That's why he came. So why would you cry? Why would you cry when you are about to create the biggest miracle of all time? Wouldn't you not be affected by all the emotions and the circumstance? Wouldn't you just go, "Hey, I am here to save the day"? And he goes all savior mode. He walks in, and he's like, "Remove the stone from the tomb. Lazarus come forth." He does that. But why would Jesus cry? That was something that has been bugging me for a while. But as I studied, the reason why I choose this, like I said earlier, was because of my life testimony. Now, I shared earlier, Seventh-day Adventist is largely my parents' religion. It's only until the age of 19. My parents have not heard this story. It's a very drama story. So after this, don't look at them and say, "How come you didn't know?" Okay? Spare them, Now, for my whole primary school life, secondary school life, believe it or not, I have done less than 4 homeworks myself. Okay? I have not done much homework. So my strategy in secondary school, and my mother is now wondering, "Oh, now I know." I will wake up at 5:30 every morning. I will take the first bus with my good friend, and I'll reach school at 6:30, right? 6, around there. It's quite fun. You always have a seat. The bus was aircon, there was nobody disturbing you. You just talk to your friend. You walk to school and it's always dark. The janitor hasn't turned on the lights. The gate's unlocked. I don't know why, but anyway, we walk into school. I get to switch on the lights. All the way from the back gate, I will walk to the canteen. So, turn on the lights. And then the economic rice, we call it the Thai fun auntie. She would have just finished cooking her dishes. And so I'll walk up to the auntie, I'll go, "Auntie, I want the same thing." And she will know I will be there. So I'll eat my breakfast before anyone else. Just 2 of us in school eating in the canteen at 6 something. And then we'll eat and then we'll make our way to school. And then so what happens next? We get to turn on all the lights on the staircase, the corridor, there's no one, turn on the fan. Towards the later part of my secondary school, we were fortunate enough to have air-conditioned classrooms. And so all I do is, I will sit in class and I'll wait for the next person to reach school. And the moment the person reaches class, I'll go, "Hey, did you do your homework?" And they go, "Yes." And I was like, "Can you let me copy?" And so I did that for my whole secondary school and the later part of primary school. Now my mother's like, "Wow, you dare to share during sermon." And so that's what I did. I would always copy. But there's one thing I always do. I will never copy an answer I don't understand. So especially mathematics, if he's like doing some weird working, I'm like, "Why did you do this?" "Oh, okay, then I copy it." So it saves me the time of calculating, it's really a waste of time. And then sometimes you have multiple questions of the same thing, like do binomial theorem twice, you just understand it, then you copy it 4 times. So that's how I did it. And amazingly enough, I was close to a straight A student. And so, in my head, this was the tried and proven method to studying. You guys don't follow, If any of you start coming home, it's not me, I'm trying to tell you it's bad. But anyway, that was how I went about secondary school. I had all the fun in the world. My first lesson on organization was at McDonald's. Every holiday gathering, I had to organize because I didn't want to do my homework. So what we'll do is, 2 days before school starts, we'll all meet in McDonald's, at least 10, 15 of us, and then I'll break everyone out. Who's good in physics? Be on this side. Who's good in mathematics? This side. So you guys do your homework, and then once you're done, we share the answers. So 7 subjects, you only need to do a fraction of it, right? The worst was literature because you couldn't copy people's book review. The other worst one was English. You cannot copy people's compo, but other than that, everything else could have been copied. And so that's how we did it. And, What? And so I really, from my tone you can tell, I really enjoyed secondary school. I really enjoyed secondary school. All we did was play basketball, copy home in the morning, eat, and then just have fun and play table tennis in the afternoon. And O-level results came out. It wasn't bad. And so I thought, okay let's go to a junior college. And so I ended up in junior college. But little did I know, the 2 years in JC were the darkest years of my life. Mr. Teng is here, oh no, okay, I went to Serangoon Junior College. You're not my teacher, so it's fine. Anyway, so I was good at mathematics and physics, so I decided I would take physics, E-Maths, the normal maths, and F-Maths, university mathematics. So I took triple maths. Little did I know physics is not physics. Physics is mathematics, right? So I took 3 mathematics. Now the tough part about the thing that made JC so bad for junior college so bad for me was, number one, my classmates were lamos. You know, they didn't like it that I copied their homework. So they kind of didn't want to share. I was like, oh man. So what happened was, I just stopped handing in my homework. I found out if I told my teacher I forgot to bring enough times, he would forget to follow up with me. And so that was the downturn. I stopped. And to make matters worse, all my secondary school friends didn't go to the same JC as I did. They went to another JC. And so I was alone in a class. They were all really hardworking, nerdy people that didn't want to share their homework with me. So angry. Anyway, so I just started feeling my grades from A went all the way to F. I became a straight F student. And what happened was, I just lost interest. And those 2 years were so painful. To make matters worse, at 19, back to school first. And so I found another magic solution to escape school. It's impossible to write parents' letter multiple times or take MC from the polyclinic, although it's $4. You can't do it multiple times, they will flag you. Why I know, don't ask me too much. So I found out the next loophole was, I would just go to the sick bay. There is no clearance for going to the sick bay in junior college. So I just go to school, I look at the timetable, I go, when the teacher walks out of class, I will walk out of class, and I'll just sleep in the sick bay for 6 hours. Then I will leave school after that. So that's what I did. I entered school, but I didn't attend school. Well, my parents are looking at me like, oh, we didn't know all this. Anyway, it was tough. And so this downward spiral started in my life, and I share with it now, it's funny, but it was not. I was so empty inside. I used to think I was good at academics, and now I was failing. And my teachers, well, they definitely didn't like me. I was so hard to deal with. And how they would give out their exam script was they would rank you from the lowest to the highest. So if you get your exam paper first, you know what grade you get lah. So I was always the top 2 to get my results, except in GP, because GP you just, you blow smoke, you sure pass. So to make matters worse, at that point, I actually stopped going to church. Why did I stop going to church? I had fought with my youth leader. She was too motherly. too naggy. So I was like, oh, I have enough of this. And if you know me back then, if I have a fallout with you, it's not just a fallout. It's not just a mode of fighting and then ignoring. It is about payback. And so my goal every Sabbath, and this is SDAC, so you thank God, wow, Lionel left. But my goal was just to make my youth leader quit. And so every week, I will go there and I'll just verbally abuse her. And so for the next 2 years, I think she will break down and cry at least once a month because of me. And my friends will be like, Lionel, seriously, you should just stop coming. You're making things hard for everyone. And so what happened was the whole group of us stopped going to church. All of us. There were like 5 boys. So Kristen was part of our, but Kristen didn't. Kristen was very quiet. So the rest of us would go, and we'll go to this thing called LAN Cafe. Do you know what that is? It's a computer game shop. And so on Sabbath afternoon, I am there. Sometimes I'm in Katong. Sometimes I'm in Upper Serangoon. Sometimes I'm in Sydney Leisure. And we're playing computer games. And that's all I did for the whole of my age of 19. I stopped going to church. I took everyone out of church. And at the end, when I knew everything was ending for me, A-levels was round the corner. And I had no idea how to study. I mean, I've never studied before. And so the only thing I knew was you open the A-level 10-year series answers, and you look through the model answers and you memorize it. So that's how I studied. And I remember telling myself, I am a very performance-driven person at that point. And this failure literally destroyed my self-confidence, my self-esteem, and I couldn't take it anymore. Towards the end of age of 18, I told myself, that's it. A-levels is round the corner. I will never do well. I will never get into a university. And I will never find a good job. And that's it for my life. So I decided, looking back, I had all the signs of depression. And so it was at that point, right after my last A-level paper, I know I took it, I just wrote, I counted how many blanks I had, and I was like, oh, okay, if everything I write is correct, I will still pass. That was my hope. I told myself, at the last day of my last paper, I told myself, I will play as hard as I can. And the week before A-level results come, I will just jump off a building. So that was my plan. I actually turned suicidal. And it was my plan all along. I never told my parents. I never told anyone. But where am I going with this? Lionel was like, you're sharing too much about school. I really played hard. I tried everything to fill the emptiness. You talk about smoking, tried it, don't like it, I don't know why, doesn't work. You tried drinking, tried it, don't like it, I keep vomiting, I'm not made for alcohol, doesn't work. Computer games, yeah, but after you're done with the game, it's all back to square one. You go clubbing, no money to club, too expensive. After you club, you still have to take taxi home. So unless you stay up until 5 a.m. and take the first bus. So didn't like that. And so it was so empty. I remembered that last 4 months where I told myself I'll play the hardest. Well, I did play hard, but I never got the satisfaction that I ever wanted, that I thought I could, go big and then KO. But the week before the results came out, I think it was 2 days before the results came out, my youth leader, you will know her name is called Faith. She works in studio now. You can ask her how troublesome I was, but anyway, she called me up. I remember her calling me up. And at that time, I was thinking, how high do I need to jump to be successful? When I have a plan, I really plan. And so she calls me up. She says, Lionel, I know you don't want to talk to me. We haven't talked in months and months and months. But something keeps impressing me this whole week that I have to call you. And I have to tell you that just one simple sentence, in all my quiet time that I'm reading, is I need to tell you that Jesus loves you. And whatever you're going through, she didn't know, He is there with you. Why did Jesus weep? To me, Jesus wept and wept because He is not a God that is just interested in our future. He is not a God that is just about saving us. He is a God that is about being with us. And because He wants to be with us, He will save us. And so, in closing, the story doesn't end here. What Jesus does after He weeps is like the story. He didn't go to their house. Jesus is not interested in the formalities of your house. Even right now as we worship, I believe Jesus is not as interested about the formalities of our worship as He is in visiting the tomb. And inside, you might have buried your disappointments. You might have buried, inside might be buried your pains, your hurts, your struggles, your conflict, your unresolved anger, your unforgiveness, your hopelessness. Maybe you don't have a plan for your future. But in this story, Jesus doesn't end up in the house. He skips the whole village altogether, actually. I don't think there's a tomb in the village. He walks past the whole village of Bethany. And where does He go? He goes to the tomb of Lazarus. And there He says, open the stone, because I am about to resurrect Lazarus. Brothers and sisters, I share this not to tell you how big a rascal I was and how God has saved me. I share this because I believe all of us need to understand that Jesus is in the empty tomb business. Whatever you have welled up in your life, that is what He's about. He wants to clear it out. Maybe you're like Martha and you tell Him the story, but He's been dead for 4 years. There's a smell. You don't want to go close to that. He's like, no. That is exactly where I want to go. Where the rot in your life is, I want to go, because at the end of this whole story of resurrection, Jesus' last words is, unbind him and let him go. Well, you can remove the word him and you can add any other thing you want that is bugging you right now. It can be a disappointment, it could be your future, it could be plans that you've made. And Jesus is saying, I want to unbind this disappointment so that you can let go. May the peace of God be with you guys.